Thank you very much for inviting me. First, really experience as an activist, being more academic and an educationalist, as I see myself more. So there is this always a fine line for as an academia about how far do we stretch out into being activists, because once you step into that role, some people think, well, you're no longer rigorous scientists, you're now an activist with a bias to promote. So when I was preparing this talk, I looked at okay, I am an EU citizen, I am Lithuanian. I do have a link with this part of the country. I was working behind the bar, would you imagine, back in 2005 in St. Neots for a year, by Boston Lakes. Good times, good times. Since then, I finished a master's in Sweden and then a PhD at King's College London. I'm now teaching at Anglia Ruskin University. So that was kind of my journey as a citizen through all of this, and that's what informed my presentation today. And I thought I'll title it about let's make sense of what's happening now, and let's have a look what we can do individually as EU citizens to kind of reflect and think and maybe get involved with organizations like the Million or others. So when I was reading a bit more widely and preparing for this talk, there is this concept of acquired rights that keeps popping up, and lots of research is being produced already. And this is an idea that if you have acquired rights, if you exercise certain rights, and then suddenly the system changes, you should be entitled to keep those rights because you have exercised them. So for example, if I apply for a job, I exercise my employment right. If I obtain healthcare, I exercise my right to health. If I move, I exercise my right to free movement and residency and so on. So all these rights, the idea is, should be granted in case there is an exit from a system which granted you those rights. But this is not without the problems, as I said, because one argument is, well, if you haven't exercised other rights, so then you don't have those rights, right? So does that seem fair? Or the other argument is, well, the idea of acquired rights come from public international law. And it's a system of rules that are a bit like contracts among states. And because contracts are among states, agreements, trade agreements, for example, or the agreement, the Brexit agreement that's being negotiated is with the EU system and Britain. Normally, in international law, people, companies, organizations do not have rights in that system of law. Rights and responsibilities are created only for states or for international organizations such as the European Union. So that means acquired rights doctrine needs a bit more teeth, so to say. On its own, nice idea, but how do you make it work in practice? One way of thinking of it would be looking through the European Convention on Human Rights. And that's an international treaty which is separate from the European Union, and is being signed by all the countries who are in the European Union. In the UK, it has been implemented through the Human Rights Act, which is the legislation. So actually our rights under convention are protected under UK legislation. So we may say, great, we have rights. Yes, some of those rights are protected by European Union law, but there are additional rights that are provided by European Union law, which are relating to economic kind of freedom, free movement, right to work, and so on, that are not protected directly by the European Convention. So, in a way, we could say maybe the Convention could help us because there was a case, and our courts must follow the Human Rights Act, which reflects, basically mirrors the rules in the Convention. And you have the right to private life, the right not to be discriminated, and the right to due process to challenge if there are state rules against you. So this is the individual challenging the state. Courage case was an interesting one when the former Yugoslavia broke down. And as a result, in Slovenia, certain categories of people who used to be part of Yugoslav citizens, they had rights. Suddenly they became what was called the erased. They were not granted the rights that they already had in comparison to people from outside Yugoslavia in the same position. They were granted the rights to stay, and so the families were broken, lots of problems arose. 15 years on, the effects of that decision, since the Yugoslav breakdown, still affected those people who were erased. So the Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of the applicant, saying, yes, you have been treated unfairly. The problem is that the case took 3 years to be resolved, an additional year because Slovenia challenged the decision. Whereas EU law, on the other side, is different from the convention in that EU law is stronger because it has this idea of any citizen can challenge EU law, say, I have the right to work, or I have the right not to be discriminated, and I can go to a British court. I don't have to go to a court in Strasbourg, like a Human Rights Court, or Luxembourg, which would be the Court of Justice of the European Union. I go to my own court, whether it's a crown court if you have a criminal case, whether it's a county court if it's a small dispute, a commercial dispute, or high court if it's more important, there's family court and so on. So you can use EU law in your court, and the courts have the duty to apply those rules inside this country. Now, when you don't have EU law, that automatic application of protection is removed. Of course, court is only one way to protect your rights. There are other ways. But as lawyers, we always talk about courts. So the idea of acquired rights, then, if you can't kind of protect it as an idea, let's protect it in law. And I think that brings back with, let's protect in an agreement which would protect those rights. International treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union as to international law countries or organizations. So we know the broad principles. The draft text is due to be produced hopefully this week or next. But it still has to be approved by all other member states, and then must be also approved by the parliament here. So if one of these failed, then we have to go back, redraft, and then again go through everybody approves and in the European Union back home. So the process politically can be challenging on both ends, not just looking from our side. And again, as the Robert talks about what kind of rights are mentioned. So the guidelines from December, they do mention certain rights, which are the key ones, and as was argued, very kind of basic ones, essential ones. There are certain rights that were not protected, such as rights, for example, if you're a UK citizen and you were living outside, to come back easily, it was called surrender same rights. So again, family problems, or if you, for example, a non-EU national, so it's called third country national from outside the EU, and you have children who are EU citizens, should you be allowed to stay with your children, small children, right? Also called carers' rights. We mentioned the people with disabilities, a similar idea. One person has a disability and the other one is not EU citizen, what's their legal status? So pensions, we can export our pensions to the other country, and so when we decide to retire, to live somewhere warmer, we can keep receiving the British pension while we're living in Spain. It's great. But what happens in the future? So, nice words. What will happen? We don't know. And there's been a paper by Oxford Center for Migration, very nicely analyzing how the permanent residence application differs from the proposed settled status application. And reading that seems like, wow, it's really nice, you know, they're only going to ask you certain things, there will be less evidence required than in permanent status. Seems amazing, but then when we look back, but what about the culture of the organization who's issuing those applications, who's collecting the evidence? Can you really change the psyche of the people working within 6 months? You know, small organizations, fine, but big and public sector organizations take time to change. So from the people from research circles and NGOs that were kind of discussed these issues with, the feeling is that they speak nice words, practice may be very different in terms of how it will turn out in real life. Proposal is, if you're here 5 years on 29th of March, then it's a bit more straightforward to apply. If your 5 years period hasn't yet finished on that date, then you can wait until it finishes and then you apply. So that's kind of the idea. But the period during which people can apply, again, that raises questions. It raises questions also about the types of people who can apply. So if you have a degree, you're a certain type of person. If you don't have degree, that's another kind of EU citizenship. And do we reach out? How do we reach out to help them to understand what the options are? I did some research with EU Roma nationals from Slovakia and Poland. And that was, again, issues with family structures, issues with different education levels, understanding where to go for help, even if you go to your local council to receive a benefit. Even if you have a British passport, because you have an accent, you look different, they will not treat you the same as. So that's what I mean, these kind of structural, established behaviors, you wouldn't expect they would change overnight. So what can we do? I would think gear up for something like permanent status application. So start collecting evidence. I know it sounds very scary, and the story with the luggage bringing your suitcase to that's challenging, but I think make your kind of EU citizen folder or on your computer or in document, not for you but also for your family members, collecting those papers because they might come handy one day. So just some examples of what kind of official documents might be required. And another option I think would be good to education, I guess, for me as an educator, find out who does the reliable research on EU law, which are the NGOs, the civil society organizations that you could get involved with, or inform them about what difficulties you have faced and your family have faced. And work together. Those of you, the literati, there's this Follow Back EU hashtag on Twitter, and I found a post by one of the politicians, but it was quite useful with some Google graphs how popular this hashtag is. So it was quite good. Some of us have quite big communities in embassies, but again, that's maybe depends where you live, and that social access issue trickles down to all this process of application, as well as the cost, for example. So, but could be one way to look at the embassies and see what they are organizing or offering help to organize. So for me, that was kind of research educational perspective, and then the question is where to from now and what the love story holds, if we can call it a love story. So that's it. Thank you.